Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity to give the presentation today about how we use SEND at US FDA. I am Stephanie Leuenroth-Quinn. I'm an Associate Director for Pharmacology and Toxicology within CDER's Office of New Drugs within the immediate office. This is my standard disclaimer slide. And then today, what I would like to do is to give kind of a very broad, high-level overview of everything related to SEND at FDA. I'm going to give you my perspective from the CDER OND side, but just be aware that there's a SEND requirement for CBER as well. But I'll go into that as well. So I wanted to briefly give a high-level introduction to SEND, how we got to the requirements of SEND at FDA. The submission of SEND to FDA, how that is done. We have a lot of different steps. And then probably most importantly, what is the value of SEND to us within OND, to the non-clinical reviewer, and actually to all non-clinical staff. And then I kind of want to end with potential future uses and a summary, and just thinking about, building on SEND and having more data and standardized data to move forward. Okay, so to begin with, what is SEND? Well, SEND is the standard for exchange of non-clinical data. This was a data standard that was developed by CDISC. And the whole point of this, and this is also true for the clinical side of data standards, is that it provides a consistent organization of data. It's computer friendly. We are able to take these data sets and in a standard way use tools to be able to visualize all of these data from multiple studies from the same application and really from across applications. So how was the SEND standard developed? Well, as I stated before, SEND was developed by the Clinical Data Interchange Standards Consortium, or CDISC. CDISC is a global nonprofit standards development organization. There are a wealth of fantastic volunteers who develop these data standards, clinical SDTM and ADAM standards, as well as the non-clinical SEND standard. They are supported by more than 350 organizational members, spanning from academia to industry to even regulatory agencies, including FDA. And I know that there is, a current ongoing work for, global activity, whether that's with Japan or Europe. So hopefully data standards will be expanding across the globe. So the SEND standard for non-clinical, how does that relate to clinical data standards? So I think it's important to point out that the clinical data standards came first. In particular, just the definition, a data standard is a set of rules on how a particular type of data should be structured, defined, formatted, or exchanged between computer systems. So it's important to note that the SEND data standard was adapted from the clinical study data tabulation model, or SDTM. So there are many concepts within SEND that maybe have a bit of a clinical overtone in terms of the terminology. However, SEND was specifically developed for non-clinical studies and has worked really well for us. And importantly, data standards are described in SEND implementation guides, or SEND IGs, which I'll talk more about, and these are developed and published by CDISC. Okay, so that's a little bit of the background. Hopefully many of you, already knew this, but now I want to move into how did FDA adopt SEND? How did this requirement come to be? And how do we, work with these data standards as they come into the agency? So to begin with, where did the data standards requirement come from? So this really came from an act of Congress. So under Section 1136 of the Food and Drug Administration Safety and Innovation Act, or FDASIA, that amended the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, or the FD&C Act, by adding a brand new section, Section 745A, specifically to address electronic submissions. So Congress authorized FDA to implement statutory electronic submission requirements by specifying the format for these submissions in guidance. Now, what's really important about these particular guidance documents is that they explain the law. And therefore they are binding guidance documents versus those guidance documents that may only have recommendations or suggestions, because again, it's an interpretation of the law. So this is just a little graphic to show the electronic study data standards framework. So you begin with Section 745A of the FD&C Act, which explains that FDA can basically state how we want to receive, standardized study data and electronic data in particular. And so from that, there is an overarching binding guidance, the 745A guidance. Now, under that are other binding guidance documents. One is for data standards, and we've been calling that the e-study guidance, and the other is the ECTD guidance. So I'm not going to talk today about the ECTD guidance. That's a whole, different topic. But just be aware that both of those fall under this primary Section 745A. Now, another couple of things that I will be talking about or touching upon within this presentation is that in addition to these guidance or these binding guidance documents, we also have other documents that are a little bit more nimble in how we can update those and how we can communicate to industry if we have a new data standard that we are requiring, or if we have some technical information to communicate to industry as well. So again, thinking about that one pathway, just the data standards pathway. So again, we start with the first binding guidance document, which describes Section 745A of the FD&C Act. From there, we have that providing regulatory submissions in electronic format, standardized study data, as our binding guidance for data standards. As I'll be talking about, there is further information about the FDA Data Standards Catalog. That is the place where we post the new standards that we are requiring. And then we also have the Study Data Technical Conformance Guide, which again is for technical specifications. And we have used that for all kinds of information to quickly get out to the public. So thinking about what exactly is said within this standardized study data binding guidance. Well, kind of the high points of this guidance is that it first states, well, what type of applications does this apply to? So this applies to drugs and biologic, and it applies to all submissions for commercial INDs, does not include research INDs or other types of INDs. It also includes marketing applications, so NDAs, BLAs, and ANDAs. It also goes on to describe that electronic data sets are required for both clinical trial data sets as well as for non-clinical studies in general. But there's more specificity to that, which I'll get to. So it also goes into quite a bit of detail around how the implementation of the data standards requirements is listed on the FDA the FDA Data Standards Catalog. So in the beginning, there was, a certain timeline that was established. We have updated this guidance since that original December 2014 publication, and I'll get to that in a minute as well. But so really, it lays out that there are certain applications where this applies to, that this pertains to both clinical and non-clinical studies. This pertains to CDER as well as CBER, and it also outlines what are the timelines for the implementation of any new updated or brand new data standard that we place on the FDA Data Standards Catalog. All right, so when did this all begin? So the publication of the 745A and the publication of the e-study guidance and even the ECTD guidance came a little bit later. But for data standards, this was all published December 17th of 2014. Now, as I stated, within that guidance, there was an original framework for when the implementation of this would begin. And so how that was laid out in this guidance is that the very start of the data standards requirement would begin for those studies started after December 17th, 2016, when you're talking about marketing applications, and after December 17th of 2017, when you're talking about commercial INDs. So there was a little bit of a gap here between the marketing applications and commercial INDs because this is all brand new. Industry had to get prepared for this. Everyone had to understand the requirements. So that's why it was thought, well, we'll begin with the marketing applications and then move into the commercial INDs. And one thing that I want to point out here is that, this was just the beginning. There have been many more requirements for non-clinical studies after this point, all that have been added to the FDA data standards catalog and have been further explained within our technical conformance guide. Okay, so as I just stated, this all began in 2016, 2017 timeline for non-clinical studies and for clinical trial data. But for non-clinical studies, this really began with 3 study types, and that was single dose toxicity, repeat dose toxicity, and carcinogenicity studies. And again, I just want to point out this was specific for CDER, OND. CBER's requirements came a little bit later within the timeline. So as you can see from this table here, that was just the beginning, these 3 study types. And as you can see, again, you had this like 1-year gap between the requirement for NDAs and BLAs versus those for commercial INDs. Now, as time went on, CDISC published additional SEND implementation guides. We took a look at them, decided if they provided value to us, and then ultimately, these are the ones that were published on the FDA data standards catalog, different SEND IGs that supported different study types to be modeled. So as you can see, as time went on, we had this 2019-2020 implementation timeline for certain safety pharmacology studies, such as cardiovascular and respiratory safety pharm. There was a SEND IG developed specifically for animal rule studies, the natural history and efficacy studies. There was another IG published for embryo-fetal development studies. And then most recently, down here at the bottom, there was another IG published for in vivo micronucleus and also for COMET assays. So here you will see that the dates kind of they do align here. So this just happened in March of this year. And so now we had updated that binding guidance, the data standards binding guidance back in 2021, so that now we are aligning these requirement dates to be the same between NDAs, BLAs, as well as commercial INDs. Enough time has elapsed since 2014 so that we felt that industry didn't need that kind of gap between these type of applications. Okay, so I've been talking about these SEND implementation guides. So again, CDISC publishes these guides. They may ask FDA for input along the way to see if if their thinking is in line with ours. We certainly can give feedback. It is up to them for how they would like to develop these implementation guides. But the point here is that CDISC does a great job, and they publish these implementation guides over time. And this has all of the technical information to how to model these studies within SEND. So what happens on the FDA side is that we will review these implementation guides in their final form when they are published. We will assess them, both CDER as well as CBER. We'll assess them for our business needs, and we will assess what non-clinical study types would be impacted. And so if we think that this, suits our needs and suits the needs of our reviewers, then that SEND IG will be placed on the FDA data standards catalog, and a requirement date will be set for that. So there's usually, at least, a year or 2 or maybe even longer before that's actually implemented. So if you think about, all of this, kind of put together, just in terms of getting a SEND IG onto the FDA data standards catalog, there's a lot that is happening at the agency around this. So first of all, as I said, CDISC will publish their SEND IG, and the ones I've listed here are the ones that have made it onto the FDA data standards catalog. So if FDA decides to place this on the catalog, there's a lot that needs to happen. We need to publish a Federal Register notice, needs to go onto the catalog, And based upon certain dates, there's probably about, around 2 years notice to industry and to everyone that this is a standard that we will be adopting, and it will clearly list the date when that requirement, will be in place. And so another important point that I want to stress here is that when we put a new standard or a new Send IG onto our catalog, that is based upon the study initiation date. So for example, if something went into effect March 15th of this year, that would mean it impacted the studies that started after March 15th of this year, for example. So in addition to that, there's a lot of activity going on the FDA side as well. We need to look at these IGs. We may do a fit for use pilot with our tools to see how, this could be integrated. We may need to give feedback to industry. We may need to, think about tool development if it's in-house, or how long that might take for external tool development to accommodate these new standards. We have to think about, training our reviewers and our staff on the new study type that will be implemented. And then we often get a lot of questions from industry around these new Send IGs when we put them on the catalog, because CDISC publishes these IGs. They have a lot of great information, a lot of great technical information, but it's up to kind of FDA to say, well, here's the details about when we expect these data sets to come in. So we have provided that type of language within our study data technical conformance guide. Okay, so I've talked about the FDA Data Standards Catalog. This is available online. Basically, it's a large Excel spreadsheet, in fact, and so this can be updated as needed, as frequently as needed at any time. So again, any change needs to go through a Federal Register notice, and as you can see here, we list, I've just shown the Send IGs, or some of the Send IGs here, and how this is structured. It will tell you that it's non-clinical, study data sets. It's in Send format. It'll tell you which FDA center it applies to. And then it will tell you the properties. So in the red box here, you'll see Send IG version 3.1 or 3.11 or GeneTox or whatever that might be. And then if you look over, to the right, you can see, support dates of when you could start submitting it, to the requirement dates, which are listed on the far right of the screen. So that's the type of information that we include within the FDA Data Standards Catalog to inform industry of the new requirements. So the Study Data Technical Conformance Guide. So as I stated, because it goes on the catalog, we still have follow-up questions from industry. So again, there's a lot of technical information in these Send IGs, but frequently there are different questions that come up based upon study design or the intent of that study. And would FDA really need that study in Send format if it was just an exploratory study, but technically a repeat dose tox study? So those types of questions we have had to come up with consistent answers for, and we usually publish that type of information within our technical conformance guide. Just under that Send specific section alone, and there's a huge clinical section. There's information on, technical validations. There's a lot of information in this guide. And it's scheduled to be published twice a year. So again, we can update this as needed. In years past, we have done as many as, 4 or 5 updates per year, again, as they are needed. So for Send specific sections, we have everything from general considerations, domain specifications. We added in a section during COVID for public health emergencies. We have these sections called the scope of Send for Send IG version 3.0, 3.1, 3.11, and so on and so forth, as shown on the screen, where we give our interpretation of the expectation of when Send is to be submitted to the FDA. So thinking about all of this together, this is just to maybe kind of show you a little bit of the framework. It began with the law. It began with a change in the law in the FD&C Act. We then have binding guidance documents that further explain that electronic standardized data is needed. Then goes on with further documentation to explain that, there are certain types of applications that this applies to. And from here, both clinical and non-clinical data standards as new standards are updated or published by CDISC, we can evaluate those and decide if they go on the FDA Data Standards Catalog as a requirement. And then again, we have documentation for technical conformance guides to give a little bit more information to industry about, what is FDA's communication around the expectation for send data sets. And we even have information in there around, we have something that's known as as the technical rejection criteria, which is an automated validation that happens when data sets and study reports are submitted to the agency through our electronic gateway. So my point is there's a lot of information here. It started back, even pre-2014, and here we are today, and Send has been absolutely wonderful for us, and we're able to use it in a lot of different ways. Okay, so with that said, I just want to touch upon submitting Send data sets to FDA, because that's a whole other process as well. So aside from Send data sets, and I've included on the left-hand side what are the current CDER Send requirements. But in addition to Send, there's a lot of other things that's submitted. So it all begins with that study report. We still require that PDF study report because, in fact, there may be information in that study report that is not in Send because it's not modeled. So if you have an endpoint, for example, let's say it's for anti-drug antibodies that is not yet modeled in Send, it would be in the study report, but it would not be in the Send data set. So that information should be included in another PDF document called the Non-Clinical Study Data Reviewer's Guide, or the NSDRG. So we have the study report PDF, we have the non-clinical study data reviewer's guide in PDF format, and then we have the actual data set files by domain, as well as the overarching define file, which gives a lot of information collectively about the data sets that are being submitted. So there's a lot that's coming through with, just one single study report if it carries that Send requirement. Okay, so again, just to touch upon, this is a vast effort. There are many different offices within CDER that work with Send, in fact. So you have that first submission comes through the Office of Business Informatics, or OBI. They run all of their standard validation checks, regardless if Send is present or not, or required or not, comes through our gateway, and it needs to go through a certain number of validations. And then on the other side here, we have the Office of Computational Science. Once Send has made it to the agency, they are responsible for uploading the Send data sets into our tools, and they also coordinate training for review staff as well. So they're responsible for dealing the practical side, uploading Send into our tools so that reviewers can use it. And then the users of Send are within the Office of New Drugs. And that's where I am centered. So all of the non-clinical reviewers, the supervisors, team leaders, associate directors, division directors, all of us collectively within the pharmacology and toxicology discipline all have access to Send to use it in ways that we need, whether that's from the primary reviewer's responsibility of reviewing a particular application and study, or maybe it's for data mining purposes or larger purposes for others. So again, just to think about the flow of Send data sets within FDA, again, Send data sets and of course, the important study report comes in through our gateway. The Office of Business Informatics will put that through standard validations, both looking for, Send requirements where that is needed, as well as for ECTD validation criteria. Once it gets through that process, then the Office of Computational Science will do another check for data quality, specifically looking at Send. So there are certain business rules and certain other rules that they will, put the data sets through to make sure that they are in the proper format as best we can tell. They load it into our analytical tools, they provide additional services, and ultimately all of that gets to the reviewer, the review divisions, and the Pharm Tox discipline within the Office of New Drugs. So I just wanted to spend a moment again about how our reviewers get assistance from the Office of Computational Science. So as I stated, the SEND data sets, once they are at the agency, they are loaded into the non-clinical viewing tool. These are absolutely fantastic. There's a lot of ways to look at the data, look at it real time. It can be interactive. You can create all kinds of, tables and figures. But sometimes reviewers, they need assistance with that. The tools are fantastic, but sometimes training is needed. So they have the option, if they're really skilled at this, they can just take the SEND data sets and the study report and go off and start the review and use these tools and SEND data sets as needed. But if help is needed, help is there. So the Office of Computational Science, they have very experienced people that really understand SEND, and they are really helpful with training, with specific questions, with if something doesn't load into the tools, they're able to troubleshoot, and they're also able to look at what we call data fitness analysis. So really, that's just kind of cross-checking the SEND data set between the specific rules. So that if something isn't loading properly, they can pinpoint that, and that information can go back to the sponsor to say, we know exactly how you need to fix your data set, and then resubmit it to us. So again, there's a lot that's going on once SEND hits the agency and once the reviewer has it in hand. So when exactly is SEND submitted during the drug development timeline? Well, the answer is through the entire, or could be submitted through the entire phase of drug development. So that first opening IND begins with a 30-day IND review. So prior to that, industry is doing all of their non-clinical studies, and some of these studies have SEND requirements. Some of these may be specific genetic toxicology studies. As I stated before, there's certain safety pharmacology studies that currently are modeled in SEND, including cardiovascular and respiratory safety pharm. And then there are those IND-enabling toxicology studies. So really kind of those acute or short-term toxicology studies that are conducted in the rodent and the non-rodent, depending on what the product is. So all of those should be coming in with that 30-day IND review with SEND data sets. Now, throughout development, longer-term studies are conducted, subchronic or chronic toxicity studies. There are certain reproductive toxicity studies. The only one that's modeled right now in SEND are the embryo-fetal development studies. And then the carcinogenicity studies. So these, either 6-month or 2-year mouse or rat carcinogenicity studies, they can come in under the IND. Sometimes they're only submitted with the NDA or the BLA. So again, at any point in that drug development timeline, there's studies being submitted that could and likely have a SEND requirement. Okay, so I just wanted to end with some points about how we are using SEND at FDA, especially in OND, within non-clinical review. So the whole point of SEND is to make life easier, really. It's to be able to have a standard way to look at the data within a study and across studies. So if you have this standardized format, it reduces manual tasks of the reviewer. So now you have data that's in a standard form, you have a tool that you can look at it, you have a way to automate graphs and tables. You don't have to reproduce those from, well, it used to be from paper, but now from an electronic PDF study report. And the bottom line is, if you don't have to do all of that busy work, then you have more time to do your real job, which is data analysis. So in terms of the value of SEND for non-clinical review, and these are just some, generic examples, it facilitates the review of non-clinical study reports. So the reviewer is able to focus on particular findings of interest. They're able to kind of quickly see if there's no toxicity there, or if there's, wow, a really strong signal for a toxicity. They're able to create graphs and charts and tables and all kinds of visualizations so that those can then be exported directly into the review template in a way that is meaningful to them and to their supervisor. So also what makes Send really nice is that in addition to the summary information, the means and standard deviations, is that you can look at individual animal data very easily. Previously, within a study report, you have a section that you're looking at for summary data. And then if you see, wow, there's a really high standard deviation, what's going on here? Let me look at all the animals in that group. You'd have to go to some other place that's difficult to find within that study report, look at all the animals, pull out that one animal by ID, and then go back and forth and compare like what is going on with that animal. Well, having that information in Send makes it really easy to be able to look at one individual animal and what's going on with that one. Is it an outlier? Is it a trend? What's going on? So that's another, really, it's been a game changer. Okay, so again, thinking about, the value, we used to have to scroll through hundreds or thousands of pages of data in a PDF study report. The longer the study, it's really, truly can be thousands of pages. Tables and figures to put into your review need to be created from this information as part of our review process. And really, electronic data sets facilitate the process of working with large amounts of information that are generated from toxicity studies. And in addition to thinking about the importance of looking at one single study at a time, Send gives the user the ability to look across studies, duration, across species, looking for similar or different toxicity profiles. So I think that's also a really important point about having standardized study data and having a tool and a database where you can pull information from. So just kind of maybe a visual to think about this. Let's say you had a particular application and this whole idea of cross-study analysis using Send. If you had a 1, 3, and 6-month toxicology study in the rat, for example, and then maybe even have that 2-year rat carcinogenicity study. If all of these studies have Send data sets and are in Send format, you can look across similar Send domains. There are many. I've listed some here. They range anything from body weights, clinical observations, food consumption. You have microscopic and macroscopic findings, organ weights, PK parameters, a variety of clinical laboratory tests. So that if you wanted to, you could compare, for example, if you're seeing an increase in liver enzymes in the 1-month study, you can see, does this translate in the 3-month study, in the 6-month study? Does it go away? Does it get worse? What's happening? So it's a really nice way to look across studies using Send. And then just also thinking about the future impact of Send within the agency and I hope across industry as well for those that are creating these Send data sets. There's a lot that can be done when you have a database of Send data sets. So first and foremost, the acute use is that it supports review efficiencies. It allows our reviewers to look at the data, interact with the data, pull out individual animal data, look across studies, look across species to try to see what's going on with toxicity profiles. In addition to that, thinking more broadly and thinking to the future, there are certainly data mining initiatives that we at FDA have already begun. Just again, looking at the data, looking across in particular drug classes, for example, do we see similarities or differences? And then future cross-study analyses, creating historical control databases to look across different, species and strains, looking across, studies, durations, again, the species, and then across products. So I think there's once you have these data in a standardized format, there's a lot that can be done with it. And it's been really helpful to multiple, initiatives at FDA. And then just to summarize, just kind of put it all together. The Standard for Exchange of Non-Clinical Data, or SEND, this originated with a requirement for standardized study data under Section 745A of the FD&C Act. SEND is currently the standard format for submission of non-clinical data for FDA. All of the requirements are listed by SEND Implementation Guide on the FDA Data Standards Catalog. SEND is submitted to FDA as part of commercial INDs, NDAs, BLAs, or ANDA applications, again, for certain non-clinical study types and depending on when that study was started. And, again, the benefits of SEND overall, SEND allows for non-clinical data to be presented in a consistent way that will allow reviewers to easily navigate thousands of line listings and a lot of data across, many different doses, species, studies. And SEND also leads to review efficiencies by allowing for interactive data analysis and rapid creation of data visualization. So you don't have to, copy and paste or reproduce the data, make your own table. That's all wasted time. The data is all there. You can put it in a format that makes sense to you and then place it into your review. And then my final slide here is really just, again, regarding SEND, regarding data standards at FDA, there are a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot going on with it. And I've just tried to put different websites that we have, whether it's for study data standards resources, our technical conformance guide, the data standards catalog, ECTD submission, which I really didn't touch upon here today. That's a whole other topic. Our binding guidance, the standardized study data guidance, as well as our technical rejection criteria, which falls under that ECTD validations. So that is my last slide. I am happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you. Let's give her a round of applause.